Welcome back. We hope that you enjoy our stories and it helps you fall asleep. You've seen them in films. Stoic men in lacquered armor, their eyes narrowed beneath the curve of a helmet, their blades gleaming in the dim light of a paper lantern, silent, focused, deadly. The samurai, an icon of discipline, honor, and mastery. But what if I told you that this image is a fantasy? A curated myth, a lingering ghost of cinema, legend, and propaganda. Because the reality of being a samurai of a true, lived experience was far less glorious and far more exhausting. Tonight, we aren't going to follow a warrior into battle. We're not storming castles or clashing swords beneath cherry trees. Instead, we'll drift slowly into the shadows of daily life in feudal Japan. Into the homes, the offices, the narrow streets, the sleepless nights and hollow rituals, and into the quiet, often disillusioning existence of the people history insists were heroes. Let your mind settle, take a deep breath, and imagine yourself waking not in the body of a warrior king, but in the sandals of a lower-ranked samurai, deep within the Edo period, centuries before the neon lights, and centuries away from the stories you think you know. It begins like most mornings before the sun. Your mat is stiff beneath your shoulder, the air faintly bitter with last night's ash from the brazier. Outside, the alley is still the straw roofs dripping from early rain. Inside, your wife moves without speaking, placing warm water in a ceramic bowl for washing your face before duties begin. There is no armor. Not today. There is no swordplay, no sparring, no poetry under waterfalls. Today, you wear plain robes. You roll your shoulders beneath the linen, knowing full well the weight of what's to come, paperwork, protocol, presence. As a samurai in peacetime, especially during the long Tokugawa shogunate, you're a less warrior and more functionary. An arm of your clan's administration. Your daimyo, the local lord, expects strict oversight of the grain stores. The tax from the rice harvest must be recorded, each crate noted, signed, and sealed. Any loss, any discrepancy is your responsibility, even if a storm took it, even if thieves were involved. And so you sit in a low-beamed room, knees tucked neatly beneath you, back straight. The ink is thick and cold. The brush worn from yesterday. Your fingers cramp from repetition, but you say nothing. This is the way. By mid-morning, the streets are beginning to stir. Vendors cry softly from beneath their carts. A woman sweeps her stoop with short, slow strokes. You step outside only when called for to oversee a minor dispute between two farmers arguing over land. It is not noble work. It is not glorious. But it is expected of you. A samurai's duty was not only combat, but to uphold order, to enforce, to interpret, and to maintain the laws of your clan. In truth, you are more magistrate than swordsman, and for many samurai, especially those of lower rank, this administrative burden was their only calling, not battles, not honor duels, but scrolls, maps, documents. The crackle of old rice paper, the long, quiet hours before the ink dries, yet even the simplest things carry weight. How you bow, how you walk, how you respond when addressed. Posture is constant, dignity enforced. The eyes of your peers and inferiors always watching. Even when your sandals squeak against the stone courtyard, even when you return home with barely enough coin to pay for the millet and miso that feeds your family. For all their social status, many samurai lived in poverty, particularly as generations passed and the warrior class grew bloated. Many found themselves without steady income. Some took side jobs tutoring children in calligraphy, writing letters for illiterate merchants, or even selling trinkets. A few quietly, shamefully begged. The caste system was strict, but hunger didn't care about class. Imagine now the contradiction. To be poor, but proud. To be hungry, but honorable. To be trained to kill, but told to sit in stillness for hours on end. You are not free to leave. Not permitted to change careers. You are born samurai, and you will die samurai, no matter how mundane your days may become. And so, you walk the same path, day after day, hearing your own footsteps echo down narrow corridors, lined with sliding paper doors, each one hiding another quiet life like yours. The sword at your hip, yes, it's still there, polished each week by habit if not use, but it hasn't tasted battle in years. You unsheath it only to wipe the blade, and sometimes, late at night, you wonder if the only blood it will ever know might one day be your own. But you do not speak this aloud. You bow, you smile, you show grace, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. Now, if your eyes are still open, let us continue from this life of daily repetition to the heavier truths that lie beneath the surface, the code, the pressure, the cost of honor. So you imagine a samurai, sword gleaming, hair tied back, armor polished, eyes focused like a hawk. You picture a warrior poet stoic, disciplined, slicing through enemies like a katana through silk. But here's the twist. Being a samurai wasn't just swordplay and honor. It was rules, endless rules. A rigid code called bushido, loyalty, frugality, self-sacrifice. No room for dreams, no space for disobedience. You didn't get to be the main character. You were the weapon. If your lord said, "Jump off that cliff," you bowed and said, "Yes, my lord." And then you jumped. They weren't rich either, at least not most of them. Many samurai, especially during the later Edo period, were broke. Picture this, high social class but living like a broke college student. You're expected to carry yourself with elegance, write calligraphy, discuss poetry, maintain armor, but your rice stipend. Shrinking, your clothes, threadbare, your debts, piling. So what do? You start moonlighting, teaching, bodyguarding, writing books. Some even open dojos just to make ends meet. It was hustle culture feudal edition. And about that whole never show emotions thing, that wasn't for style. That was survival. Emotions were dangerous. Cry in public, weakness. Laugh too loudly, disrespectful. You had to carry your pain like a secret, even when it was unbearable. Many samurai lived with chronic anxiety, not glory. Their lives were dominated by uncertainty. A single insult could end in a duel. A political misstep could mean forced suicide seppuku, a ritual disembowelment. Not exactly the glamorous warrior death movies show. You didn't retire either. You served until death. You weren't free. You were owned by your clan, your lord, your family's honor. You were the blade, and blades don't get choices. So next time you see that lone samurai staring into the mist, maybe he's not contemplating a poem. Maybe he's wondering how much longer he can keep pretending everything's okay. We like to picture the samurai as stylish warriors, sword drawn, cherry blossoms fluttering dramatically behind them. But the daily life of a samurai? Think less cinematic duel, more boot camp, mixed with office politics and a dash of ritualized self-destruction. From a young age, future samurai were thrown into training that made modern military drills look like a summer retreat. We're talking pre-dawn wake-ups, relentless martial drills, archery practice, swordsmanship, horse riding, and calligraphy. Yes, calligraphy. Because what's the point of cutting down enemies if your handwriting is embarrassing? Discipline was drilled into every fiber of their being. There was no room for laziness, ego, or even sleep, really. But here's where it gets dark. That whole honor above all thing, it wasn't just a motto. It was a ticking time bomb strapped to their dignity. If a samurai brought shame to their clan or lord, either through failure, defeat, or just being politically inconvenient, they were expected to commit seppuku, ritual suicide by disembowelment. Yes, it was as painful and horrifying as it sounds. No glory, no fast death, just agony, blood, and a ceremonial knife, often in front of an audience. Imagine having to RSVP to that. And then there was the bushido code, which wasn't some romantic Jedi-esque code of honor. It was a social straitjacket. Samurai had to show complete obedience to their lord, even if he was an incompetent fool. Their loyalty wasn't earned, it was demanded. Any sign of insubordination, hesitation, or even having too much personality could cost them their status or their head. Worse, during times of peace, many samurai had no wars to fight, so they became glorified bureaucrats, paper pushers with swords, struggling to keep up appearances. Some fell into debt, others drank away their frustrations, and more than a few ended up wandering as masterless ronin, shamed, unemployed, and hungry. So, next time someone dreams about the samurai lifestyle, remember, behind the blade and the armor was a brutal, unforgiving existence. Less a Zen warrior, more exhausted civil servant with a sword and an existential crisis. At the top of the social pyramid, samurai were hailed as elite warriors, noblemen, the armored embodiment of honor. But beneath the polished surface lay a truth few romanticized. They were prisoners of their own myth. By the Edo period, the samurai class had largely stopped fighting. The swords they wore became ceremonial status symbols, not survival tools. In fact, a majority of samurai had never drawn a blade in battle. The government, run by the Tokugawa shogunate, enforced peace so strictly that being a warrior was no longer a job. It was an identity you couldn't shake, even when it no longer made sense. Imagine this. You're born into a warrior class during a time of no war. You can't farm, you can't trade. You can't even legally start a business. Those were jobs for commoners. But you're still expected to live with dignity and display refinement, read poetry, master the tea ceremony, and of course, look fierce in armor you'd never wear in combat. And the kicker? You're broke. Many samurai lived on fixed stipends from their daimyo lords, rice-based payments that barely covered expenses. As prices rose and rice payments stayed the same, a lot of samurai sank into debt. Pawn shops became familiar haunts. Some samurai were forced to sell their swords, a deeply shameful act just to pay for necessities. A growing number turned to writing, teaching, or serving as low-level bureaucrats. Others, stripped of pride and purpose, drank heavily, got into petty fights, or faded into obscurity. A disgraced samurai was still bound by the same brutal expectations: maintain honor at all costs, which often meant, you guessed it, seppuku. The word ronin, a masterless samurai, became synonymous with shame. These wandering men, cut loose from their clan ties, were feared by society and often reduced to mercenary work or outright crime. The same swords once forged in battle now served as props in plays or tools of rebellion in violent uprisings. Even within the upper echelons, life wasn't always grand. A daimyo's court was a political snake pit. Status games, betrayals, and ritualized displays of power ruled the day. One wrong move, one misplaced phrase of disrespect, and you could end up ordered to commit suicide not by your enemies, but by your own lord. So yes, the samurai were admired, but they were also trapped, caged in a rigid system of inherited duty, impossible ideals, and a weapon they could no longer truly use. They lived under the constant weight of honor, a code so strict it broke more lives than it saved. Cool? Sometimes. But mostly exhausting, lonely, and merciless. Next time someone waxes poetic about wanting to live like a samurai, remind them it wasn't all sword fights and sunset duels. It was rice taxes, silent suffering, and the slow erosion of purpose in a world that no longer needed warriors. But they stood tall anyway, sometimes out of pride, sometimes out of fear, often out of sheer habit. And maybe that's the real legacy, not the blade, but the burden it left behind. Until next time, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss our next story. Good night and sleep well.